NSA reconnaissance expedition is going down to the South Pole area to make certain observations and to look for some bases.
We go into space because whatever mankind must undertake, free men must fully share.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be.
Welcome to Secrets of Antarctica, where we uncover hidden secrets under Antarctica's frozen landscape. Secrets that could unearth where we've come from as a species and where we're going to in the future. I'm your host, Brad Olsen, and today we'll take a look at mysterious phenomenon happening all around the White Continent. From no-fly zones over certain areas to details of Admiral Byrd's encounters with breakaway civilizations. I may be the only researcher in this field to have self-financed a trip to Antarctica in search of the multitude of mysteries said to exist down there. In my personal encounters with other sea captains and personnel working at the research stations, I was able to confirm that there is a massive no-fly zone which is enforced near the South Pole Station. This is kind of odd that there would be a no-fly zone in one of the most remote locations in the world, but yet there it is, suggesting that there's something they don't want people to see on the surface of the ice. Also, the staff at one Argentinian research station said that they witnessed UFOs overflying another one of the Argentinian bases. When I was there, I was trying to get information out of some of the workers at these bases, but they were told not to discuss it. In fact, there was another one of the scientists who was reprimanding one guy who was about to start telling us, don't say anything. In my limited knowledge of Spanish, I could kind of tell that she didn't want anybody to talk about what I eventually got this worker to break his silence and to reveal that there was a UFO encounter just a few weeks prior to when I was there over the Argentinian Belgrano 2 research station. This station is not that far away from the land claim of the Third Reich in New Schwabenland. Could it be that the Argentinians witnessed the Flugelrods? We'll learn about those German UFOs in this episode. Under the Antarctic Treaty, which was finally ratified and passed by all nations of the world in 1961, the treaty says that no nation may enforce any land claim and cannot perform any military training operations or weapons testing, which it was known the Nazis were doing in New Schwabenland. So that kind of activity was prohibited under the Antarctic Treaty. Different militaries of the world are permitted to assist with logistical missions, and by naval or Coast Guard ships in the water, over land in the form of snowcat rovers and helicopters or airplane cargo flights. The military can also assist if there was an emergency evacuation of someone, or if there was a desperate situation where they had to get supplies in when in the winter many of the water passages are chock full of ice, so you need a specialty kind of ship to get through the ice fields. When you look at images from Google Earth, you can find that there are other huge holes in the ice, some of them a mile or more long, and elsewhere. But the one at the South Pole is classified as a no-fly zone. This coming from many data points, including a recent naval officer whistleblower who said that you can't fly over this location no matter who you are, including the military. They have a cover story that it's for the ice cube military and research studies of the atmosphere, and they didn't want to have the pollution of an airplane mixing with the air samples that they gave. But these flights are so rare, and the snowcats, which deliver the goods to the South Pole Research Station, come overland on diesel fuel, and they're very dirty. They're allowed to drive into the South Pole Station, and they're not banned from bringing in the supplies. But in the summer season, you have the big cargo planes that are landing there and offloading personnel and supplies. This is all in the wake of Richard E. Byrd, who was a very adept pilot with many acclaimed flights in his career, including over the North Pole and several flights over the South Pole itself. In fact, Richard Byrd piloted the first ever flight over the South Pole on November 15, 1929, and most certainly would have sighted the massive hole in the ice. Now, this is really important because later on, he will be summoned to fly back to the hole, and having a knowledge of where it was located would have been very instrumental for him to locate the route to fly back there. I don't think he ever flew into it, most certainly not on his first exploratory flight in 1929, but he knew where it was located, and when you're up that high flying over, you can see many miles in the distance, and off in the distance, not far from where the magnetic and geographic South Pole is located, is this hole in the ice. And so Richard Byrd would have flown over and seen this hole, but just thinking maybe it was another one of these seasonal holes that maybe came and gone. But when he was summoned to go to that hole, then he probably thought it's time to drop the plane in and take a look. I love it when there are matching data points to Admiral Byrd's testimony and his diary entry, which we're going to discuss shortly. Linda Moulton Howe is a great researcher in the field. She has many different whistleblowers who come to her.
Movies, we watch them, we feel them, we escape into them. But how often do we stop and think about what it takes to create one? Every frame, every story, every moment built by creators you've never heard of yet. Now, that changes. Film Faster 48 is your opportunity to be seen. Hosted by me, Billy Carson. Create a short film anywhere between 4 to 8 minutes long. Compete across multiple categories. Best film, best director, best screenplay, best cinematography, best editing, best actor, and many more, such as our new category for AI. Win and step into the industry. Earn a co-producer credit with New Republic Pictures and work on a fully funded feature film, The Knock 2 with Providence Film Group. Plus, distribution opportunities with Vire Network, as well as cash, prizes, and potential sponsorship deals. This is your moment. Submit now. Filmfaster48.com. This event will be held on June the 8th this year at the Garland Hotel in LA. See link below for details.
Lights, cam, action, that's all it takes. From idea to screen, yeah, we elevate. Film Faster 48, we create. No way.
Seeking to tell their story, one of which was a whistleblower named Brian S., who had his own eyewitness experience describing the several kilometer wide hole near the South Pole. Linda received an email from a 61-year-old Navy officer who was stationed for several years in Antarctica. Brian S. was part of a C-130 flight crew that encountered high strangeness during his time in Antarctica from 1984 to 1987. Several times, he and the crew all watched silver discs darting around the sky. He said he saw what he described as a, quote, an entrance to a human ET collaboration base, end quote, near the South Pole. Curious description. Because flying from the South Pole Station on an emergency rescue mission to the Australian Davis base, his crew made a diversion through the no-fly zone against orders, and that's when Brian S. spotted the massive chasm. They all discussed what they saw on the flight down, and they attempted to fly over it again on the return flight, but over the radio came an advisory by ground command, do not do it. Upon returning to McMurdo Station after the pole, Brian and his team were reprimanded and were told by their superiors that, quote, you did not see what you just saw. Brian S. never had to sign a non-disclosure, curiously enough, and years later, he decided to speak out to Linda Moulton Howe at Contact in the Desert, and I was a speaker that year as well, because what he said was that he witnessed the hole located 5 to 10 miles north of South Pole Station. The air sampling of this no-fly zone is covered for secured airspace surrounding the massive hole. And Brian S. saw a snowcat road dropping down into it and spiraling like a corkscrew all the way down as far as he could see. So not only did Admiral Byrd fly his plane down into it, but there is road access down into this great giant chasm of a hole near the South Pole. There's even photographs from outer space where you can see the hole. It's that big. So it must be very significant that it's there. Now the NSA, which is the National Security Administration, which the nickname for many years of the NSA was No Such Agency, because they completely denied their own existence until it was well established that they existed. The NSA has a building in McMurdo Station, an unmarked building that's run by the NSA. Nobody knows what's in it or what they do there. But the NSA personnel are also stationed at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, I believe, to monitor the comings and goings out of that giant hole. It is an established fact that Richard Byrd was the first man to fly over the South Pole in 1929. And during that flight, they were weighted down so much that they had to hurl over some of their emergency supplies when the plane threatened to crash from too much weight. Could it be possible that Admiral Byrd spotted the hole near the South Pole and came back to investigate on a subsequent flight? Richard Byrd had a very interesting career in the Antarctic during multiple excursions. In all, Admiral Byrd led 5 expeditions to Antarctica, culminating in the U.S. government's Operation Highjump and his last trip to Antarctica in Operation Deep Freeze. After Admiral Byrd passed in 1957, his son found his diary and eventually published the book, which is titled The Missing Diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, A Secret Expedition and Journey to a Paradise Inside the Earth, written by Richard Evelyn Byrd. It is still available at major bookstores. I have a copy of it myself. It's a fascinating read because in his diary, Richard Byrd describes his return flight to the polar region on February 19, 1947. He states how he had flown an airplane with only one other person, his radio man he called Howie. And when they dropped into the hole, he witnessed a verdant green valley. And he saw, eventually, a very advanced civilization that existed down there. Although the diary starts with the chapter and the title, quote, "The Exploration Flight Over the North Pole," end quote, it would be impossible for Byrd to be at the North Pole because at that time in early 1947, he was the head of Operation Highjump. So he was definitely on the southern continent during the time frame of Operation Highjump, not in the Arctic at all. It was known that when Admiral Byrd came back, he was put under gag orders and even disciplined for talking about the expedition, in which after he was debriefed, he would not talk about it ever again, but he did drop some really pertinent little clues that he went beyond the poles in his famous interview in the 1950s that's all over the internet. And I found that really interesting that he would describe it as beyond the poles, because what is beyond the poles? Either you're flying to the pole and coming back to where you started, or you keep on flying. There is nothing really beyond the pole. It's way up high on the polar plateau, and it's just as desolate as any desert and perfectly flat for hundreds of miles. But when Admiral Byrd took his plane down into the hole, he described multiple mountain ranges, which do not exist in the Arctic Ocean at all, but don't even exist in this part of Antarctica either, or if they did, they're well below the ice on the continental landmass. The cover of Admiral Byrd's diary book shows a massive hole over the Antarctic continent, not the Arctic. It must be a veiled way of describing his return flight to the massive hole near the South Pole, because the diary describes the story of Admiral Byrd and his radio operator flying a plane to the polar region during the Operation Highjump. In the early part of that operation, he gives the account of dipping his plane into an entrance to the underworld and encountering an advanced inner Earth civilization. As the most famous Antarctic explorer to ever live, Richard Byrd making the claim of reportedly discovering an advanced civilization under the ice in Antarctica, well, that holds a certain degree of credibility. On his 1947 flight, there are 3 hours of missing time, both on the official flight log and recorded in Byrd's diary when he reported the radio base going quiet. And at the Little America base, they too have this 3 hours of missing time from their logs. They must have thought the plane crashed and we're going to have to send out a rescue mission. But this is when they started to witness a verdant green landscape. What the heck is that doing in Antarctica? Replete with unusual flora and giant fauna, including a woolly mammoth that was at first mistaken by Howie the radio man and Admiral Byrd as an elephant. They couldn't believe it when they looked even closer and said, "That's a woolly mammoth." Well, while they were going into the hole, a lot of things started happening on their aircraft. Both his magnetic and gyro compasses began to gyrate wildly, eventually losing all of his navigational instruments and the flight controls itself. Can you imagine how scary that would be to lose control of your own plane? Midway into the inner Earth flight, his craft was intercepted by 2 disc-shaped craft at his wingtips, at which point Byrd lost full control of the plane and it was somehow being flown remotely. A voice with a Nordic or German accent comes over the radio and announces, quote, "Welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, Admiral, you are in good hands," end quote. Indeed, the 3 aircraft landed 7 minutes later, safely outside a large, shimmering city, pulsating with rainbow hues of color, clearly of an advanced civilization. Upon coming out of the craft, Admiral Byrd noticed Nazi insignia on the craft of the two discs, and the two tall blonde men who were escorting pilots came out of their cockpits to greet him by name, and they both had German accents. After taking a conveyor belt walkway into what he describes as a Buck Rogers city. Buck Rogers was a big popular futuristic comic book back in the day, as Admiral Byrd described it. The radio man was left behind while Admiral Byrd was summoned to meet the master, who seemed telepathic and otherworldly when they met. The two men had a conversation in English, with the master starting by saying, quote, "I bid you welcome to our domain, Admiral. We have let you enter here because you are of a noble character and well known on the surface world." End quote. Surface world, Byrd half gasped. "Yes," the master replied with a smile, and he continued, quote, "You are in the domain of the Ariani, the inner world of the earth. We shall not long delay your mission, and you will be safely escorted back to the surface and for a distant beyond. You see, our culture and science is many thousands of years beyond your race." End quote. The master went on to explain to Admiral Byrd his concerns of the U.S. military's recent detonations of nuclear explosions at the Trinity site near White Sands, New Mexico, and the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. He said their flugel rods were flying saucers and sent out to the surface world to witness these events. Indeed, during the Trinity explosion, there were reports of UFOs flying in the air to witness the very first detonation of a nuclear bomb during the Manhattan Project at the very tail end of World War II. The master went on and implored Admiral Byrd to return to the Pentagon and to deliver the message not to further advance the nuclear age. Admiral Byrd and his radio man were allowed to leave, and they flew out the same way they came. The same two German pilots escorting the men out, saying farewell in German, "Auf Wiedersehen," and over the radio when they allowed Byrd full control of his airplane to fly out of the hole and back to their base at Little America. Upon arrival back in Washington, D.C. on March 11, 1947, Admiral Byrd is ordered to attend a staff meeting at the Pentagon. He gave his full account of the inner Earth discovery and the meeting with the master. "All is duly recorded," he said in his diary. "The president has been advised." As he later wrote in his diary, he was detained for several more hours and interrogated by top secret security forces and a medical team. He was a bit humiliated by the medical experiments and the way they strip searched him and probed all over his body. And before leaving this interrogation, he was placed under strict gag orders via the National Security Provisions Act to remain silent of what he witnessed, quote, "on behalf of humanity." He is reminded that he is a military man and he must obey strict orders. His final diary entry states, quote, "For I have seen that land beyond the pole, that center of the great unknown." And it's interesting that in a subsequent interview that he did a couple years later, while still under the gag order, he did let it slip that he flew beyond the poles. And I think that's a veiled message telling everybody of the world that he went into this inner Earth environment. What's so incredibly astonishing about Admiral Byrd's diary is that he was told he was in the domain of an advanced civilization, the Ariani, this inner world of the Earth. They were a culture with science many thousands of years beyond his race. We've heard about some of these inner Earth civilizations, such as Shangri-La and others under the Tibetan Plateau, which also were of human-like people who had incredible technology at their disposal. This does merge with the fabled New Berlin base, which the Nazis had spoke of. Maybe they had just doubled up with the Ariani culture and called it their own New Berlin base, allied with a much older and advanced race from inner Earth, giving us a description of such a fantastic world well below the ice in Antarctica. As this journey continues, I hope you start to realize that the key for the future of humanity might be found in this strange continent. With more than one eyewitness account, it is hard to not believe that Antarctica has more than meets the eye, and potentially the key for human advances and technology that we could only dream of. In our next episode, I'll investigate the implications of Operation Highjump, as well as Nazi activity in the area since prior to World War II. Thank you for joining me on Secrets of Antarctica. Remember, the truth is out there waiting to be discovered. Until next time, I'm your host, Brad Olsen.
And it's a reconnaissance expedition. It's going down to the South Pole area to make certain observations and to look for some bases.
We go into space because whatever mankind must undertake, free men must fully share.
Time will come when we'll have to go after that stuff there.
Meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin.
We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be.